Okay, so now that we've discussed some of the problems with the common sense method and other ways of knowing things, how can we actually be confident that we know something about society? So here we want to get at some of the core of this class, uh, and that really leads us to the scientific method. So here, what we want to do is we want to make our questions specific about what we want to know. We need to realize that we're not asking something so general. We want to narrow that question down. We always sometimes start with kind of a vague idea or a topic that we're interested in, but we need to narrow that down and ask something very specific. That's the first thing. And we also have to realize that this question may challenge some of our preconceived notions. Some of the best questions do that. If you think about science and the history of science, you realize that the best questions were those that weren't afraid to challenge the powers that be. So that's important to keep in mind. Also, we don't want to redo what's already been done always. Generally, we want to expand the knowledge base. So to do that, we have to first review what's been done, which can be a pretty daunting task. There's quite a lot of research out there on a wide variety of topics, much more than you probably realize. Oftentimes, I'll have a student that will hand something in and it will say something to the nature of, "Oh, I couldn't find anything about this topic. There's nothing done about this." And I'll look to Google Scholar and I say, "What about these 25,000 articles?" Certainly, they don't not supposed to read 25,000 articles, but it is an exaggeration and it's incorrect to imply that nothing has been done. Most likely, anything that you're interested in learning about or researching in social sciences will have had some research done. So it's important to review a good portion of that research, those that are most pertinent to your research question, before you go ahead and decide exactly how you're going to form and investigate your research question. So this is something about how this is going to form. Also, we can be confident because we use empirical, measurable observations. We have different types of research in the social sciences. We have qualitative research, we have quantitative research, we've got something called historical comparative research. All of these forms of research still will use these empirical, measurable observations. We form hypotheses, particularly in the quantitative research, we form hypotheses. So in terms of particularly the quantitative research, we want to make sure that our hypotheses are not what C. Wright Mills called abstract empiricism, but that those hypotheses and tests are actually theory-driven. This next point is extremely important. There are many methods. There are many tools. How do you know how to get the right tool for the right question? You've got a lot of tools in your toolbox. Which one do you use? Well, this is the study of research methods, and that's what it's for. So you know which tool to use for which research question. So how to match the method to the question is very important. And this is why the question is really what dictates the method that you're going to use. Make sure that the techniques that you select to investigate your question are both valid and reliable. So we need to discuss what is validity and what is reliability. Validity refers to measuring what is supposed to be measured. You are actually getting at the thing that you want to get at. There are different types of validity, and we'll discuss those through the course, but you're measuring what's supposed to be measured. Reliability means you have consistency in results. Something can be valid and not reliable, or reliable and not valid. So when you think about validity, you think about precision. Thinking about precision. Is it precise? When you're thinking about reliability, you're thinking about consistency. Does this method, way of measurement or way of analysis, yield consistent results? Does it give me the same thing every time? If I stand on a scale and the scale tells me my weight is way off, 50 pounds overweight, but every time I stand on the scale, it gives me the exact same measurement of 50 pounds overweight. I can still use that scale to determine my weight. I just have to subtract 50 pounds. So because the scale was reliable, even though the answers were not valid, there was something more we had to do with them. So other characteristics of the scientific method: we don't want to fear controversial results. We need to replicate. So when we conduct a replication study, we are trying to see if we get the same results, sometimes in a little bit of a different area or with a different set of cases. But we want to see if the same relationships hold. Or we do the exact same study, but we want to make sure we're getting the same results. That's replication, and that's part of how we form a scientific truth. I want you to watch that Neil deGrasse Tyson video that talks about this. Empirical research that says that our knowledge claims are based on observed data, statistical analysis, and other scientific methods. There's also a rationalist approach, which uses logic, reason, and intuition to understand phenomena. So these two approaches are different and they support one another. So there's the approach that says we can only know things by if we observe them, and that's true, it's important, but we can also use our reason. We don't want to throw that out the window either. And if we depend solely on our reason, we don't test our reason. And then we can fall into some of the errors that Aristotle fell into, and others when they didn't feel a need to test things, like, well, two objects of different weights and thinking that they fell, the heavier one fell faster than the lighter one. Aristotle made that mistake. So it wasn't until they were tested that we could see that objects of different weights fall at the same speed. So that's an example of why we need the testing, and somehow our brains, when they're abstracted from the empirical world, can mislead us. However, if we just look at the empirical world, how do we make sense of it without theory, without our thoughts, without thinking, without using the tools of logic, reason, and so forth? So we need both. Finally, how do we know? This question of epistemology, it lies at the center of the scientific method. This refers not to any particular content, but a way of knowing. So science isn't about any particular thing. It's just, how do you know? Well, I use a scientific method by empirical tests, by observation, and so forth, and that's how we know. So that really is what epistemology means. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. So that means it's a study of knowledge of proposition. How do you know something, not how do you know somebody? That's a different type of knowledge, right? It's the knowledge of whether or not a state of affairs in the world around us is true or false. That is propositional knowledge, and that's the kind of knowledge that science is concerned with. And that's why we are focused on epistemology in this course. Everything in a methods course is really going to answer this question, how do you know? If there is a problem with that, then the whole knowledge claim is eradicated. We need to be certain of our knowledge claims, or have a higher degree of certainty towards those knowledge claims. We also use a little bit of humility in the social sciences. We avoid words like the word proves. We don't say, this proves that. Simply because the science, even though it has rigor, there is still room oftentimes for a new research that may come on in the future that shows that, well, this doesn't happen that time. And that's because there's different types of knowledge, and you'll get at some of that in your reading. The universalist laws are not usually used very much in the social sciences. That's one type of knowing, but it's not used quite as much. So this, again, I mentioned, is different from competency knowledge and acquaintance knowledge. Competency knowledge is the kind of knowledge that you have from practicing something over and over and getting better at it.